Hello everyone and welcome to CameraPro. Today you've got two live hosts, who's myself, Phil, and we've got Lachlan. And we're going to be doing the OM presentation with OM Systems, all about the new OM-1. So Lachlan, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Lachlan. I'm one of the sales team here. We'll be talking to Aaron today. He's the National Product and Sales Specialist for OM Systems, formerly known as Olympus. We will be fielding questions throughout the day stream. So if you have any questions, feel free to pop them through. And I'll get Aaron to introduce himself.
Hey everybody, how are we? Wherever you happen to be. And thank you very much CameraPro for having us along this evening. As the guy said, we're here to talk about the brand new OM-1 from OM Systems. So strap yourselves in. There's lots of detail that we're going to go through, but as the guy said, that we want your questions. We want this to be as conversational as possible as we go along. So don't hold back. Anything and everything that you want to know, that's exactly what we're here for this evening.
Cool. All right, presentation is up.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, guys. So, look, to begin with, and as the guys already alluded to, this is a big deal for us. We've released a couple of lenses under the OM System banner up until this point, but we really need to make needed to make a statement as this sort of new brand that we are now under OM System, and we needed to do that with a brand new body. And I'm really pleased to see that we've done exactly that. So. Some of you may have seen me on streams before. I've been with the company for quite a long time. This is my 17th year with the company. But in all of that time, we've had some sensational products along the way, but absolutely nothing like this. So let's get into it. So for those of you who are very avid photographers, you may even remember the original OM-1. Now, the OM-1 was absolutely revolutionary for its time because it was so much smaller and lighter, but obviously still delivered the quality that people expected. And that was professionals as well as enthusiasts as well. So to take that OM-1 branding into the digital era, it's got a lot to live up to, but it's been 50 years since that original OM-1 release. It's time to sort of set a new benchmark again, and that's exactly what we're going to be doing. So what you're seeing on screen here is all of the key things that we want to talk about with the new camera. Some of them we're going to go into a lot more detail on than others, but that's exactly why we would like to see all of your questions come through as we go. But having said that, we're going to have lots of time for Q&A at the end of the presentation as well. So even if something prompts you along the way and you didn't get it out at the time, don't panic. We're going to have you covered across the entire thing as well. So. 5 key points. So the 5 key points that we're going to cover tonight are going to be next generation in image quality. Now, a lot of this is down to the new sensor and processing engine that we've got in the OM-1. So we're going to take you through some detail on that and how that's going to work and how that's going to benefit you as a photographer. Next is computational photography. So we pioneered handheld high resolution shot as well as high resolution shot along the way. We've actually taken it to another level, but a lot of what I'm going to talk about tonight is very much about the feature, but also what the benefit to you as the photographer is going to be. And what that actually means is it's all about enhancing your user experience. So it's all about, once you've actually got camera in hand, how it's going to perform for you and work with you as the way that you photograph. Next, unparalleled speed. So we are really setting a new benchmark when it comes to speed with this new camera. But it's not just for sports and wildlife photography. It's very much going to be a benefit for any style or genre that you're going to shoot. And again, a lot of that's down to that new processing engine and as well as the sensor. Next, absolute reliability. One of the biggest things about our E-System cameras from Olympus has been their reliability. And the whole concept behind our brand is to be smaller and lighter, but obviously be able to be taken anywhere and shoot in any sort of condition. So they've actually set a new benchmark when it comes to advertised reliability as well. And finally, we'll finish off with some video capability as well, because video features are so much more important to a much larger group of photographers than ever before. So have that all-in-one solution that covers you for both stills and video, incredibly important. And I'm very proud to say we've also got that with this new camera as well. So let's get into it. So let's start with image quality. So I'm not going to bore you with all the really techie stuff today, guys, but there is some important points that we want to get across when it comes to this new setup, because this is where it all starts. Now, what we've actually got is a new sensor type for us with an interchangeable lens camera. We're doing a stacked BSI sensor, and I'll actually show you what that actually means in a second. But really, at brass tacks, what it means is you're going to get overall better resolution because of the way that the pixels are structured. But the other massive benefits are going to be noise performance as well as dynamic range. But it all needs to be driven by something. So that new processing engine, which is the TruePic 10 or the TruePic X, enables things like that 120 frame readout that we're going to talk about in a little while. But it also means that every single process within the camera is going to be faster. And again, that's all about user experience, about getting the shot, getting the in the experience that you're actually in at the time, but also delivering the quality that you would expect. Finally, image stabilization. So this is something that we've been market leading on for a very long time now, and I'm pleased to say that they've taken it to another level with this new camera as well. They've actually made the internal IS unit even more powerful, but smaller and stronger. And that's important because the way that we actually stabilize is a little bit different to everybody else, where our sensor is basically floating on magnetic gyros, which means that it's not touching anything. Now, the other benefits of that is that it can move quicker, it can stop quicker, it can move in smaller increments, but it can also be programmed and told to what to do. So that's where you get things like handheld high resolution shot and that sort of thing. So it's not just in those technology sides, it's also going to enhance your experience with the camera because you can do things handheld that you've never been able to do before. Next, overall image quality. So like I said, down to this sensor construct, you're actually going to get better resolution and detail out of this sensor than any other 20 megapixel sensor that you've seen before. And it's actually, again, down to that construct. So again, that's a benefit to any photographer, but I'll actually explain to you why. Because traditionally you'll see a CMOS sensor, which is just a sensor type, and it's a very commonly used sensor type, but there's actually a downside to it. So you can see the way that the sensor is actually constructed, where you've got your micro lenses where that light is actually coming through the front of the sensor. It's actually being blocked or impaired by some of the wiring in there. So that's the biggest downside to that, is incorporating noise into your shot. So they're still relatively fast to read out, but there are drawbacks to it. And that's why lots of different companies are actually going to this BSI or backside illuminated setup, where you're actually removing all of that wiring and electronics from that pathway. And the biggest improvement in performance there is noise. Now, we'll talk a little bit more about noise in particular in a second, because that's only part of this story. Because once you actually take that BSI concept and then stack it, so you've now got logic boards replacing all of your standardized electronics underneath, you're actually getting faster readout speed on top of that noise performance. But it also means that you're going to get actually better, faster and more accurate autofocus readout as well. And that's where we lead into the actual new focusing type that we've got with this camera. So what we're calling it is cross quad pixel autofocus. Some of you may be familiar with the technology called dual pixel autofocus. Basically, without getting too technical with it, you're basically breaking the pixel down into smaller pieces, which means that you can actually read more information and faster, and therefore more accuracy. Now, this combined with the frame rates that this camera can do means that this is going to autofocus like nothing you've ever seen before. Now, obviously the camera's been around for a couple of weeks now. We've been watching with bated breath to see people's, real life results for them. And not a single person has been disappointed with what they've seen so far. And the more hands-on experience you have with the camera, obviously you're going to be able to continue to push that further. But the reason why this is such a big deal is that this does not exist anywhere else in an interchangeable lens camera. So it's a brand new technology that we're bringing to the table, but it's not technology for technology's sake. There is absolutely a benefit to it. There's also much higher amount of autofocus points to choose from. So you've got 1,053 AF points. And they cover your entire frame as well. So you're not having to even slightly adjust the way that you're framing. You can go from edge to edge. And also the points are much smaller than what we've done before as well. And that was actually based on user feedback, because with our previous OM-1 series cameras, the focus points, even though they were small-ish, they probably didn't allow for as fine a focus as what you can do with this new camera. So again, that's a benefit to any photographer that's out there.
So Aaron, would you say that the quad pixel setup is more accurate than, say, traditional 2-pixel?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's all about the amount of information that it can calculate against. So again, if people are familiar with dual pixel, where the pixel is basically divided into two, both of those pieces of information are being able to be read out to calculate faster, because you've got more information to be able to do it. But the limitation with that is that it only reads left to right, because that's the way the pixels are split sort of down the middle. So by going to this new setup where you're actually breaking it into 4, it means that it can read out horizontally, vertically, and diagonally. So again,
yes, sorry. That means because I know with traditional dual pixel, there is a limitation with horizontal lines. Does that apply here if you've got diagonal points?
No,
or cross
absolutely
points?
not. And it's more about, yeah, it's more about the way that 4-point construct is able to sort of read and talk to each other. So because you've got all of that additional information to be able to read from, you're not only getting faster actual focusing, but you're also getting more accurate focusing because of that.
Cool.
And a lot of that is actually down to that processing engine as well, because the sensor is capable of it, and it's got that actual physical focusing system on the front of it. You need that processing power to be able to bring that all to life as well. So it's a massive, massive deal. And again, once people actually start to see it for themselves, they'll be completely blown away about what you can do with it. The next point, ISO. So this has probably been the perceived Achilles heel of crop sets and cameras or micro four thirds cameras previously. That really isn't a problem anymore. So a couple of points on this. Our previous generation OM-1 series cameras had a native ISO range of up to 6400. What they've actually done with the OM-1 is increase that all the way up to 25,600, but you can actually boost it up to 102,400 if you really want to. But realistically, what it means is that you've got a much broader band to be able to work with, which is going to guarantee low noise, but also delivering high detail. So it means that low light shooting, regardless of the situation, you don't just have to rely on your image stabilizer anymore. The camera sensor and processor is obviously going to take care of all of that for you. And I've got a couple of examples of that I can show you as well. But I guess this is actually a very big deal, because it really does sort of close that gap down for why people might sort of need to go to a full frame sensor, because traditionally that was always the way you were going to get the best noise results. Whereas with this new camera, not the case. And we're very, very excited about this as well, as you can imagine. I can just see a little question that's come through here from Dave.
Pop that up on the screen now.
Yeah, yes, please. Yeah. So is it possible to use the electronic shutter with the shutter sound? From what I can see, it's only an option for mechanical. Is that right? Yeah, at this stage, and this is actually something that we've fed back, because you're not the first person to ask for that. You can enable the autofocus beep, which means that at least you know that you've locked onto frame. You do get a visual guide of it on your LCD screen or in your viewfinder, where you'll see that green dot go solid once you know it's locked focus. But you can turn on the autofocus beep, so at least you know that it's locked, but not the actual frame capture. So I'm really hoping that is something that they can sort of offer in firmware upgrades moving forward, because, yeah, like I said, you're not the first person to ask for that. So thank you, Dave. That's a really good question. Okay. So again, real life example. So here we are with the 7-14 shooting at 6400 in live composite. I think you'll agree the detail capture and the color representation in this is absolutely gorgeous. Now, over the next couple of weeks, we're going to have lots more images that we're going to be able to share with you guys from our global ambassadors. So we recently had our guys called an OM system day, where they talked to all of our ambassadors and guys that sort of shot with the camera before it was released. So we're going to have access to lots more images and content over the next couple of weeks. So we'll be sharing that with the CameraPro team, and you'll see it on social posts and that sort of thing as well. But because again, all the stuff that you see on paper is sort of like, okay, yeah, that sort of makes sense to me. When you actually see the result, that's the more important thing. So once we have more of that to share with you guys, obviously we'll get that across too. Quick thing on the processing engine. So as I said, 3 times faster than anything that we've had in previous generation cameras. And that allows for faster autofocusing, but because it's got 60 times the computational power of any camera that we've done previously, it allows you to do things like a high resolution shot, either by hand or by tripod, and have those images put together in camera for you at less than half the time. So you're not only getting the result, but you're getting it faster. And again, it's all about that user experience. It's about what you feel and see when you're actually shooting with the camera. Also on top of that, so for macro shooters in particular that are out there, 2 times faster for focus stacking. So you can actually stack up to 15 frames inside the camera when you're focus bracketing. You can actually take up to 999 if you really want to, but obviously you need to take those images out and put them in a software program to stack. But the process in camera is something that we've been doing for quite a long time. So again, to be able to do that faster is a big deal, especially when you're shooting out in the field and potentially challenging conditions as well. But again, overall,
with the software, does the Olympus/OM system software do that stacking?
Yeah, it can do. Yeah, absolutely. Yes. So, yes, you can do. I've actually got a slide on that right at the end of the presentation, because there was actually a big upgrade to our Olympus or OM system workspace, which is our editing software program. So if you're an Olympus shooter, it's absolutely free. All you need to do is put your serial number of your camera in there. And that's not just for current generation cameras as well, folks. You can do that with many years ago's cameras, all you need to do is put your serial number in to be able to download that. And also, again, better noise performance, as we talked about. Cool. Okay, so here's just some sort of example photos of what we want to be able to show, that level of detail that we're capturing with these. So all of these, actually, as I'm reading that, I've just seen a comment there. So try 20,000 inside a room, and it's amazing. Thank you very much for that comment, because folks, again, you'll hear what I'm going to talk about as far as what's on paper. We want to hear from you guys on your experiences with the camera, because people are genuinely being blown away by what they can achieve in camera. And then obviously you can take that to another level with your processing. Now, good point to remember as well. So our Olympus Workspace program has already been updated. Capture One has already been updated for the OM-1 RAW profile as well. You can put Adobe, or if you haven't Lightroom or Photoshop, whatever it happens to be, it will currently accept OM-1 files, but the profile has not actually been officially built for the camera yet. So you can put those into Lightroom, into Photoshop, because we've actually seen some comments on that online about it. But stay tuned, because there is actually going to be an update to actually get the most out of those files, because that profile will be custom built. So we'll make an announcement on that, and we'll have some stuff for the guys from CameraPro to share with your community as well.
Sounds good.
So cool. So again, lots of all different scenarios, all different color variations. One thing that I will actually point out on color with this is that, I mean, I've shot with Olympus for a long time, as I said, and our colors have always been extremely natural. What I've actually found with the new camera is that the colors look very rich, but without being oversaturated. Now, I'm assuming that that's a lot down to the new sensor and processing engine combination. But what you're going to find is that even if you're shooting JPEG straight out of camera, they are beautiful, and you can see by some of the examples that I just showed there. But once we've got that total RAW support from all the third-party softwares, obviously it's up to you to how far you want to take that as well. But now you've got so much latitude to be able to play with.
We were actually
also
lucky enough,
dynamic.
once you guys sent us the camera, we've got a really nice spot on the back deck outside CameraPro where you can see the city in Brisbane, and you get really nice sunsets going over the city. There was one just the other day, had these really nice warm colours, and the oranges that were coming through in it were they were really nice.
Yeah, nice. No, that's cool, because a lot of people sort of hear that term dynamic range and may not actually really know what it means. Basically, what you're talking about with dynamic range is the amount of detail that you're going to see in your really bright highlighted areas, as well as your really dark shadow areas. Now, this is a full stop better than what we've seen. So you've got a bigger window to play with compared to an EM1X or an EM1 Mark III. But one thing I do actually want to show you with this, and I've got a real life example of this as well, is that you've not only got a bigger window to play with, but you've also got better shadow recovery. Now, what I mean by that is that if you threw your RAW file, and this is the original capture on here, if you threw this RAW file into your editing software, you'd sort of go, okay, cool. With a traditional Olympus ORF file, you could recover your highlights massively, and that's actually still the strength of our system. But what I'm really pleased to see with this is that even those little bit of tweaks that you want to make into your shadow areas, you can do that without it damaging your shots, or without having to, doing spot healing or, spot adjustments to that particular area. You can still make those global changes without it damaging your file, especially in those shadow areas as well. So again, what's on paper versus what we're seeing in the real world.
And
so
how many
again,
stops
all
of
of those.
range? Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Lachlan, say again.
You said you got an extra stop. How many stops is that now?
So it's they haven't actually given us an official rating, but you're probably looking at around the 12.5 straight out of camera, which might actually even be pushing, because there was something from Photons to Photos that came out the other day, but I'm not actually sure how they tested it, because it's definitely not what you see in camera. But again, there's not a lot of RAW support for it as of yet, because all of that update only recently happened. So you're probably looking at around that sort of 12.5 to 13 straight out of camera. But when you actually use the high resolution shot, you're getting another 2-stop improvement on top of that, for both dynamic range as well as noise performance as well.
Yeah, wow.
So if you are shooting in those high dynamic range scenarios and you do only want to have a single capture, you don't want to bracket, you've now got the power to be able to do this with the OM-1, which is great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just before you go on there, Aaron, I've got one more question coming in from Malcolm. I'll pop up on the screen.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so within camera focus stacking, is it now possible to choose a shutter delay in between the capturing of sequence shots? It's been a limitation if you don't have a cable release with your EM1 Mark III. So, Malcolm, unfortunately not. But again, I have actually seen that feedback before, and we have passed that on to our engineers. For those of you who aren't familiar with what we're talking about here, guys, when you actually start that focus stacking process within camera, it's all done with electronic shutter. And so basically what you're doing is choosing your starting point, which is the very front edge of your subject. And then once you start that sequence, it'll take multiple shots at small increments apart, but it'll push that focusing sort of distance away from the camera. Now, what Malcolm's asking there is there a way to sort of delay the time in between each of those shots? I would imagine that the reason why they haven't done it yet, Malcolm, is purely to make sure that the exposure is accurate in between each frame. But even if you're talking about a small delay or something that you can customize, I understand where you're coming from. So let's wait and see if that's something that we can pull together for you.
Could you delay the first shot? Like, could it put
You
on
can
a timer?
definitely delay the first shot.
Okay.
One thing that's actually even better than that is that what you can actually do is use the wireless application. So you can use our OM Share software to remote control the camera. That actually works like a wireless remote, or you can actually do it through live view, and obviously you're not touching the camera while you're doing it. So you get the best of both worlds with that. The range on it is quite good, but if you've got lots of competing signals and you're doing it indoors, then obviously you might have a little bit of a range limitation with that. But we do actually have a new wired or wireless remote control that is going to work with the OM-1 as well. So we'll touch on that in a little while. But again, these are great questions, guys. Please keep them coming.
There's one more coming for you as well from Wendy here.
Yeah, cool, Wendy. So website shows hardware for workspace and what is recommended or even ideal. I've got a reasonable Windows system, but workspace is very slow. What matters most with a video card, memory, or GPU? So Wendy, basically those minimum requirements that are put on there are basically to run the program, or obviously to maximize the performance of that. It's a combination of all of those things. One point I will also point out, if you haven't downloaded the software and you do actually want to have a look at it, there's another whole category and another download that you can have with Workspace, which is AI noise reduction. But that is extremely processor and GPU heavy, and it actually will restrict you. So if you try to download it and your computer is not up to spec to be able to do it, it'll actually block you from doing it. Now, that is something that we have already fed back to our engineers. Is there a way to sort of get around this? Because right now it's tied to that level of performance within computer. But obviously we don't want to limit people's capacity to be able to do it. So this has only just been released, folks, by the way. So this only got released with that update to Workspace when the OM-1 was announced. So no doubt the engineers will be able to fine tune that to make it more available. So the short answer, Wendy, is yes, it might be a little bit slow, but again, depending on the type of PC that you have, you may look to do a little bit of up-speccing yourself. Otherwise, if you're running a Mac, obviously that's a little bit more difficult. But by the same token, again, those that are there as minimum requirements as opposed to how you're going to absolutely maximize your performance. But I will move on because I don't want to get bogged down with that. But it is a very, very good question. It is an important thing, especially for your post-processing. IS, we've already covered what we're talking about with image stabilization, guys. But one thing that I do want to point out is that you'll see 8 stops on a lot of advertising and slides and that sort of thing. The 8 stops is a combination of what we call sync IS when you're combining a lens with the body. Now that 8 stops is capable with our 150 to 400 mil. But I've no doubt you're going to see more and more tele lenses that have that sync IS technology built into them, because what they've actually changed with the new camera is it actually gives you a whole full stop improvement with your rolling axis. So just as a quick point, for those of you who don't know how internal stabilization works, your physical sensor moves around inside your camera in order to compensate for any movement. So it's on gyros and it actually moves with you to make sure that it keeps your shot steady. The benefit for that and doing it inside camera is that it works with every single lens you put in front of it. Now, the reason why they put the IS built into the tele lenses is that sort of central pivot point for when using tele lenses gets further away from you, the bigger the focal length that you use. So when you do have that sync IS, you're actually going to get a better experience when you're using those bigger lenses. But this rolling axis, again, is going to be a benefit to any photographer, because even that tiny little press of your shutter release is going to incorporate a little bit of body roll in there. So for still shooting, it's probably the most important. But because the standardized CEPA testing and the guys that actually do the testing for stabilizer batteries and all that sort of thing, they still actually only test on a pitch in your jig. They don't actually use anything that has a rolling axis on it. So when it's not measured, so hence why the camera is still rated officially at 7, but you're actually, once you actually get the camera in hand, you're going to see that there's a massive improvement to what you can do handheld. But there's also other things that have been incorporated in here as well. So handheld assist, which is basically a grid that comes up on your screen that enables you to look at that grid to line things up to make sure that you can actually shoot handheld for longer. And another thing that's completely changed with this camera is that you can actually use the image stabilizer in combination with things like live composite and live time. Now, no other camera in the world has been able to do this, even our own previous cameras. So the things that, again, you're going to be able to do handheld with the OM-1 is like nothing you've seen before. Okay. So next, computational photography. Now, this is a fairly quick one to get through, but it is really, really important because for those situations where you do want to up your resolution of shot, you have the ability to do that. Now, with our EM5 Mark II was the first camera that had a pixel shift technology in it, where the sensor actually physically shifted around to give you better resolution. So what we can do now is you've got a single capture for 20 meg for every single shot that you take. But if you're shooting handheld high res, you can actually shoot a 50 megapixel RAW file, or if you've got it on a tripod, you can do an 80 megapixel RAW file. Now, that's because that sensor is physically shifting on the inside of the camera, taking multiple shots and then putting them together for you. So with the OM-1, same as our previous cameras, you're actually getting that final result in camera right there in front of you. And because of that processing power, it's happening so much faster. But one of the things they've actually done to, again, enhance that user experience is actually make things like this easier to access and faster to access. So yes, you can change this, but when you first get the camera, when you hit that red record button on the top of the camera, it'll go straight into high resolution shot. But if you want to change something, all you've got to do is press and hold that button, roll the rear control wheel, and it'll cycle between off, handheld or tripod. And then if you want to disable it, touch that button once more time, and then it's off. So, and you can actually do the same thing with live neutral density filter, the AI detect autofocus. Again, it's all very intuitive to use and at one touch, but it's also incredibly customizable like what we've always had. So I'll talk about the way the sort of defaults are set up on the camera, but this is a big one because again, it's all about ease of use and streamlining access to key features like this.
Is it only OMD cameras which have the live no tripod multi-stacking option?
Handheld right now, yes. So we pioneered this back with the EM1X, and then that carried over into the EM1 Mark III. But again, I suppose the difference with the OM1 is that the resolutions are the same, but the speed of processing and the quality of result is even higher. So, so that's why it is such a benefit for landscape photographers. You can still actually use handheld or tripod if you really wanted to, but handheld is a little bit easier for when you're shooting in studio. So because it's, again, pixel shifting, you can't use flashes with it, but if you're using permalights or LEDs, you can still get those shots and still get them in that level of resolution like what you need as well. So it isn't just limited to completely still images. It operates very similar to the way that your shutter speed does. And the reciprocal rule is that the higher the shutter speed, the faster it's going to capture. So once it stacks all those images together, you're not only going to see that result faster, but the actual capturing of those each individual shots is still based on your shutter speed, again, to keep that exposure even across each capture.
Nice.
Cool. Live neutral density filter. So again, this is something that doesn't exist outside of Olympus or OM system. If you guys haven't experienced this, please jump online and check out some of the videos on this, because the benefit of live neutral density filter is that it helps you control your ambient light the same way that a physical ND filter would. But that's only half the story, because with our previous generation cameras, they were rated to up to ND32. With the OM-1, it's another full stop better. So you're all the way up to ND64, which just means that you can control that sensation of movement and your ambient light in camera. But that's actually only half the story. The other part of it is that you actually see what that result is going to look like as far as the subject movement goes in your viewfinder or through your LCD before you capture. So it's, again, streamlines that entire process for you. Now, one thing that I will point out, and it gets asked quite often, is can I use this in combination in camera with physical filters? And absolutely, yes, you can. So if you're really looking to control that environment, and you might only have, you know, like a small stopper like available to you, or depending on, you know, the lens size or millimeter that you've got with you, you can actually do those both at the same time, because all you're really doing is darkening that starting point, and then the camera's going to help control over the top of that as well. So incredibly powerful tool.
Just one question coming in there for you, Aaron. We've got a couple actually, but the first one, just swinging back to what we were talking about, just with the high res modes, can it be working on the HDR mode?
No, it doesn't. But I guess the benefit of doing that computational shot where you're taking up to 12 shots and putting them together is that you're actually getting better, obviously resolution, but you're getting better dynamic range and you're getting better noise performance when you do it. So yes, it is still giving you a singular image at the end of it, but obviously you've got all of those benefits tied into that singular file capture. So that is actually something that we have been asked about for a while, is that a couple of these systems, can we use them together in unison? So focus bracketing and stacking combined with high resolution shot. The sky's nearly the limit with this new camera and the way the processing engine works. So you never say never, but currently it doesn't. But something like this would, again, be an absolute coup for especially landscape photographers or people that need that extra level of dynamic range and still produce a singular image at the end.
Did you mention that you get an extra 2 stops?
Yeah, so you get a massive improvement in dynamic range as well as noise performance when you're doing that, because basically you're taking all of the color and detail information from multiple shots and then cramming that all like you would do in a bracket or stack if you were to do it manually. The only difference is that each one of those shots is exposed exactly the same as the one previous, whereas in a bracket you might take 7 individual shots, all shot at different exposures, and then combine them to create that higher dynamic range.
And just quickly, similar on the ND, we've got Malcolm who's asking if that feature works with video or in video mode.
Yeah, great question, Malcolm. And the answer is no, but I'll explain why. Basically what it's doing is, because there are cameras out there, mainly cinema video cameras and that sort of thing, that you can actually control the voltage to the sensor in order to create like a neutral density filter effect. What the camera is actually doing is whatever stop rating you select, so say for example you use an ND64, that is 6 stops of light. What the camera is actually doing is taking whatever length of time your exposure was set to and then breaking it into smaller increments, or 6 smaller increments, and then each filter is the same. So ND32 is 5 and so on and so forth. So the reason why it doesn't work in video is because that's the process that it's actually doing in order to break that exposure down into smaller increments to get you that final result. But again, showing you what it's actually going to look like before you capture it. So really good question again, Malcolm. Thank you.
And the fact they can do that without the heavy voltage regulation,
yeah, absolutely,
light system is very unique.
Absolutely. And one point that I will make as well, and you will need to get this effect when you shoot on tripod. This is shot with just normal live neutral density filter, but what you can actually do for these sorts of shots is run the tripod high resolution shot, and you're actually going to see a very similar effect to that movement of water, because it's and the reason why I highlight that it has to be on tripod is that if there's too much movement when you're doing it by hand, it's you're going to say, no, I didn't have enough sort of detail to match up to get the final result, whereas on tripod that doesn't happen. So you can actually still get that high resolution shot and get that sensation of movement shot within your frame, but obviously at an 80 megapixel raw file at the same time. So a little bit of a tip there, especially for you landscape photographers out there too.
I did actually notice it myself, because I managed to do the high res just in the handheld, and it did that with the water as well. So even handheld, it seems to do it a little bit.
Yeah, so
I had the pleasure.
It's probably one of that processing improvement for the OM-1, because if you tried to do that with an EM1 Mark III or an EM1X, even if you kept your camera steady, if there was like a massive amount of water movement in it, it would just go, no, I don't have enough information to match. But because this whole process is happening so much faster, that's why you're probably seeing better flexibility with it as well. So thank you, Phil. That's a good point.
Well, on that, what was more impressive was there was actually bushes in the background as well, and the leaves were moving quite a bit, and it still held them together quite well. So it's really doing a good job computationally.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, the computational stuff, again, it's not just for landscape photographers in particular, but that's where you're going to see its biggest benefit. Again, better dynamic range, better, obviously higher resolution, but you're just going to get a better, more malleable file to be able to work with once you actually sit down to process it as well, which is really cool. AI detect autofocus. So this is something that we pioneered back with the EM1X. And lots of brands, or pretty much all the brands, are doing something similar to this now. So the one point I want to make with this is that the reason why it's so clever is because of that high readout speed. So you've got that quad pixel autofocus setup, physically managing the information. But what the processing engine is actually doing is creating a depth map based on the contrast as well as color. So hence why you can see this little GIF here where we're losing sight of the subject, but the subject is still continuing to be tracked. And it's initially picking up the shape, and then it's even trying to narrow down to the head or to the eye. even at that level of speed. So we'll talk more about this in detail as we go along, but again, it's part of that next level computational photography that you can do with the OM-1. So here's a couple of, again, example shots of the fine detail capture, and we're going to talk about speed in a little while. But again, the things that you can do with this camera for any movement of subject is pretty incredible. As we talked about before, so stacking in cameras, again, so much faster because of what we've had before. But again, live composite, so our long exposure technique that's been built into our cameras for quite a few years now, you now have the ability to do things handheld. Now, this actually kind of makes a lot of sense, especially with live composite, because the party trick to live comp is that it only writes new light as it's introduced. So they could have captured this scene as a singular capture, held the camera where it was, and then go in and quickly paint the light into the frame because the camera's stabilizing at the same time. So really, really clever. But again, in the real world, it just means you've got a much more flexible package compared to what you've seen before. Okay, next we are going to talk about speed. So guys, do we have any questions on that stanza before we move into speed?
Now we're looking at there. Mira did mention just before on the ND that there was some great sample photos in there. Just with
no, thank you very much. And Mira as well, on your point, you can still stack in Lightroom, absolutely yes. So all of those techniques and processes that you've had before, you can still do, absolutely. Okay, so when it comes to speed, we need to talk about how we're actually capturing the subject. So what you've got on screen here is all the different focus point types and setups that you can select. As I mentioned right at the beginning, the individual points are so much smaller compared to what we've had previously. And really, it just means if you're trying to shoot through an obstruction or really nail that absolute point of your shot that you want to, now you've got the ability to do that. On top of that, you've also got the ability to customize those autofocus setups as well. And you can still use these in combination with some of the AI detection focus setups as well. But when it comes to frame rate, this is why this is such a big deal, is that you have the ability to shoot blackout free. So when you're looking through your viewfinder, you're not going to see any drop out. It's literally going to run like a TV screen at 50 frames per second in RAW. Now, that is absolutely huge. And to be honest, it's probably more than what most people will ever need. But it really is important, especially to sports and wildlife photographers, because you need to not only capture the moment accurately, but you also need to be able to go back through that sequence and pull that frame out from that sequence that is going to be that real killer shot that you want to have. You'll also notice at the bottom of the screen here, we've got the different setups as far as the speeds and the mechanical versus the electronic shutter. And you'll also notice that right at the bottom there under SH2, you've got 50 frames, there's a little asterisk. And this is actually a really important point because not every one of our lenses can actually operate at that 50 frames per second. It's literally down to the construct of the way that the lens actually focuses. So I'll show you all the different lenses that are available for this. So if you do have an OM-1, either got one or on order, and you want to make the most of this focus, you definitely want to combine it with some of these lenses. But it's a very important point to point out. But before we move on to that,
Aaron, could you go back one?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think this graph answers a question that we had earlier. Yeah, yeah, there you go, you got it. Looks like you're at SH2 for the tracking.
So actually I did say, I've seen lots of comments sort of fly past from that, but I did notice somebody typing something about SH1. Just please note, guys, and it is actually something very good that they've changed with the new OM-1, is that if you want the highest frame rate, you shoot in SH1, because that's where you get the up to 120 frames per second. However, if you want to refocus in between each of those frames, that's where you want to run continuous focus combined with SH2 setting. Okay, so yes, both of those are going to be blackout free, but if you're trying to capture at that higher frame rate, that's when the focus is locked. You're not going to be able to continuously focus as you go through that. So thank you for pointing that out, because I did sort of catch that out of the corner of my eye. Oh, there you go. My birds in flight answer need to use SH2. Perfect. So thank you for pointing that out. Sorry, 120 frames per second, Mira said. Yeah, absolutely. So 120 frames and still in raw resolution, guys. And it is also blackout free. And what I was really, really pleased about, and we'll touch on the viewfinder in a second, but what I was really pleased about is that whether you're shooting in that really high frame rate at 120 or even the 50, there's no resolution drop to your viewfinder. Everything stays exactly the way that it should do, and there's no lag. So that's incredibly important, because you can have a really high resolution viewfinder, which we now have. But if it's actually going to sort of buckle or, not give you that sort of true to life experience that you want as you're shooting, it kind of defeats the purpose. But with the new camera, you're obviously getting that.
Well, Phil had the opportunity to shoot it for a little bit, and we did have it in the office for like a day.
Yeah.
And yeah, 120, no lag. It's crazy. It absolutely annihilates the buffer. But
It
blew
also
me away.
annihilates the
absolutely.
memory card, not going to lie.
Yeah, well, I've actually that's a good point, actually, because I've been doing some experimenting with different SD cards just to see what was going to give us the best write capability, because obviously you're talking ridiculous frame rates. The SanDisk ones, surprisingly, were still the best that I've had so far. I've tried some Angel Bird ones, plus a couple of exotics. So it is a really good point. And no, guys, we're not just trying to sell you something, because I mean, we as a brand don't sell the SD cards, but obviously CameraPro do. For any high-speed camera, or if you're doing high-speed video, having that better SD card is absolutely essential. So it's not just about how quickly you're able to review your images and all that sort of thing, because the camera will actually let you do that on its own. But you don't want things to stop or be interrupted or impede the performance of the camera. And that's why we always recommend those high-speed cards to operate on your camera. And this camera is absolutely no exception.
Yeah, and even outside of the brand of the card, definitely look to go UHS 2 instead of 1. 1 just won't keep up with the camera.
No, 100%, especially if you're capturing in RAW, and especially when we talk about video in a second. If you're looking to capture 4K 60, then you definitely need a V90 card combined with that UHS 2 standard as well. So cool. Thank you for that. As I said, guys, 120 frames per second with focus lock, just so we don't get sidetracked here. But the other point I want to make with this is that with our Pro Capture feature, and if you haven't heard of that before, basically Pro Capture allows you to half press your shutter release, and then multiple frames are going to be cycled in the buffer of the camera over and over and over again until you completely press the shutter release, and then bang. All of those pre-captured frames go into your card, and then you can keep shooting afterwards, depending on how you've got it set up. Now, with our previous generation cameras, you could do up to 35 frames. With the OM-1, it is now up to 70 frames. Now, yes, you can customize that, because again, 70 is a ridiculous number. But by the same token, you've got that level of support that you need to. But before we move on to the actual lenses that you can do this with, the power of this camera is sort of personified in these points. So you can do that Pro Capture still at 120 frames or continuous focus with 50. But you can also, again, shoot at those frame rates that I just mentioned, but you can also use it in combination with that AI detect autofocus. So you've got again, these systems all working together to streamline your shooting performance, and no overheating, no dramas with any of that side of it as well, just in case somebody's like, wow, that's a lot going on. Absolutely, there is a lot going on, but we've had this technology previously, but that new engine and new sensor just allows us to take it to another level. So that's a good point to make as well. Sorry, a quick point from Wendy that I'm just seeing here. Can you explain AF area pointer? What's the difference between the on 1 and on 2? AF area pointer. I need to find that. Actually, Wendy, do you mind if we leave that to the end? I need to actually jump into the camera and find that for you, so I can see what that's in context to, because I'm just not getting it off the top of my head. So please don't let me forget. I will come back to that, because I have my camera right here ready to go. So just give me 1 sec on that. Again, high speed, these are the sorts of things that you can capture. So you're seeing lots of birds and wildlife shots with this, because it's all about fine detail capture. Multiple different lenses and focal lengths all used here. Slow subjects, fast subjects. This camera is going to have you covered for any of those. So yeah, you're seeing lots of wildlife stuff here, but you're going to see the same performance when you're shooting people, portraits, children, all that sort of thing. The camera's going to have you covered in all of those scenarios and deliver that level of quality that you would expect, even though it is capturing at such a ridiculously high frame rate. And I'll finish on this guy, because I just love the color of this guy. But again, the level of detail out of this is crazy. Okay, so as I mentioned before, there are a certain range of lenses that can actually, are capable of doing that 50 frames per second continuous focus. It is the 12 to 40 original version, as well as the new version, which I'll touch on in a second. You've also got the 12 to 100 mil, the 40 to 150 f2.8, the 300 mil f4, and of course, the daddy, the 150 to 400 mil. So I'm actually hoping to try to get my pre-production sample back into the office to do some content shooting with lately, because we've only got one pre-production one. And for any of you who have either had one on order, or if you have one there with you already, or probably more so if you've got one on order, We apologise for the delay. These are predominantly handmade, so you can't actually up the production on these. But we are getting regular stock of these. So if you are interested in getting one of these, unfortunately, the time frame's roughly 5 to 6 months. But we are hoping to get ahead of that sort of sometime soon. So it does everything that says on the tin. It is an amazing lens, but by the same token, globally, nobody expected it to be selling the way that it has done, purely down to its cost. So, okay, got a little stop here. Yes, from Arian. Yeah, Arian. Yes, so that's actually a really good point. And I sort of touched on this before, but yeah, let's definitely talk about this, because what we were talking about earlier, as in the actual raw support and actually what people are seeing with the camera until the full support is out there, I imagine that once all of that support is actually out there for what you can actually do with those raw files, you're going to see updates to this. So there was quite a bit of information out there that was sort of pre-production and all that sort of thing. But once we have that full support, you're going to be able to see the full detail on all of those, because yeah, I saw exactly what you're talking about as well. But stay tuned. We've obviously got more updates and improvements to the actual third-party software and what you're going to be able to experience in real time, I suppose, is probably the easier way to say it.
And BSI fundamentally should improve dynamic range. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely
it
right.
Should be
so no, exactly right. So straight out of the box, there's definitely that improvement there. And then again, with the processing engine, it also means that you're not only doing things faster, but you're actually getting a better result, because you can actually absorb and process that information a lot more true to life. So good question. Thank you very much for raising it. But again, stay tuned, because you'll actually see a lot more on that. We're really actually hoping that update, especially to Adobe, was going to happen before the camera came out. So yes, that you can plug those raw files into any Adobe product, because RAW got updated, but the actual profile for the new camera hasn't been built yet, or hasn't been released yet. So it should be any day now. The Adobe Camera RAW updater is usually on a 4 to 6 week sort of cycle, and we're at the end of that now. So yeah, fingers crossed that that's going to be any day now. But no, thank you for the comment.
And just before we move on there, Aaron, I've just got a quick question, just what we were talking about with the lenses.
Sure.
If you're going to pop on the teleconverter with the 300, does that still allow you to shoot at that full rate?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so no limitation when you're using the teleconverters. No.
Cool.
Awesome. And to finish up on that little section there, guys, all other lenses in our range will still shoot at 25 frames per second with continuous focus with the new camera. But having said that, there is actually one lens that we need to talk about, the 14 to 42 mil kit lens. Now, that lens is not capable of going anywhere near this again. Again, it's a kit lens. And I don't really anticipate too many people shooting with a 14 to 42 with an OM-1, but you never know. So it is an important point to know that all other lenses will shoot at 25, except for that 14 to 42 mil. That'll drop to about 13.
So even the little 9 mil fisheyes?
I don't think we really class those as real lenses anymore. But no, I get your point.
Yeah.
Next, Viewfinder. So not only is it double the resolution of what we've seen before, but being an OLED display, much better for color representation, anti-reflection, as well as anti-fog. And not just because it's blackout free, this is just really, really nice to look through. So it's nice and big, the magnification's bang on. It just means that, again, no matter what you're shooting, it's a pleasurable experience to be able to look through this. And I'll be honest, I didn't really sort of get caught up in the whole, resolution battle as far as, viewfinders and LCDs and all that sort of thing, until we had one. And then I went, yeah, okay, now I get it, because it's just really, really nice to look at. Did you see the same thing, Phil?
Yeah, no, I found it really nice to use, actually. It's still, there's no camera on the market that's quite optical, but as far as refresh rate on it, it's one of the fastest I've seen for sure. And it's a lot bigger than what I've seen before in the Micro Four Thirds system. You don't notice, normally I've found that they're quite a small eyepiece. This one's getting to the point where it's like a lot of the full frames, and it just sort of looks natural, like you're looking through a full frame optical viewfinder.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but again, it's not just the specs on paper, guys. Again, it's all about that user experience. So,
and I think
there you go. Wendy saying, loving the new EVF. Thank you, Wendy.
Yeah.
I'm glad that you feel the same way I do, because it is actually really nice to look through.
I think the big thing I found with it in particular, was that as you're actually panning and tracking something, it actually holds it really well and it doesn't struggle to keep up. It just keeps going with it. So that was a nice
Yeah,
improvement.
absolutely. Because again, higher resolution is one thing. That refresh rate and no lag is just as, if not even more important, especially for subject tracking. So if you are using that SH2 for continuous focus in particular, where you're trying to refocus and track, that's where the power of that system actually really comes to the fore. Because again, in any scenario, it's nice to look at, but that's where the performance actually comes into it as well. Yeah, absolutely. So AI detect autofocus, so as I mentioned, it carried over from the EM1X, all of those subjects plus more. So you've actually got cats and dogs or pets built into this as well, but it's 2 times more accurate and 3 times faster to recognize, which is staggering because I predominantly used an EM1X up until this point, and I never had an issue with how quickly it was recognizing subjects. But to go faster again, and you do actually notice it, it's instantaneous. It really, really is. So using all of those systems together with that AI detection is incredible. It's a little bit hard to get used to be perfectly honest, because you're sort of going, oh, I'm just sort of trusting the camera is going to be doing what it's supposed to be doing. But if you let it happen, the whole point behind it is that you know the subject's going to be in focus. All you need to do is manage the exposure and your framing. So, and that's why this is such an important technology moving forward. To give you a little real life example of how this actually looks, I've cut together a couple of little videos here. So we're going to see some real life shooting of what you will actually see through your viewfinder when you're shooting, and then we're going to pull some images out of there as well. So these are all shot with a 40 to 150 f2.8. And as you can see, whichever one of those frames you pull out, it's crisp and sharp as you would expect. Now, this is where we pulled that GIF from, where you can actually see we're sort of technically losing line of sight of focus to the shot or to the subject, but you're still, every single one of those shots is still tack sharp, even though it's moving at such high speed and transitioning. Now, this is just as important, if not probably even more impressive. So birds in flight, one of the most challenging things in the world to do, especially because you're predominantly using long telephoto lenses. It's really easy to get ahead of where your subject is, but this is what you're going to see in real life, where it's going to lock on and continue to track that subject, even if you don't keep it exactly where you would expect it to be. Next, reliability. So again, anybody who's used an EM1 series camera will know how robust they are for shooting in any environment. What they've actually done with the OM-1 is set a new official benchmark with this. And what I mean by that is that its ingress rating is IP53. Now, this does not exist in any other interchangeable lens camera right now. But obviously you need lenses to go with this as well. So I always pondered why they'd never given us an official sort of weather sealing rating for a lot of our lenses. They may have been waiting for a camera to be able to catch up to where they already were, because if you go into all of the lenses that are actually now officially rated to the same standard as the camera, you've got the new 12 to 40 f2.8, so the version 2, the new 40 to 150 f4, the 8 to 25 f4, the 7 to 14 2.8, the 12 to 100 f4, the 8mm fisheye, 40 to 150 2.8, the 300mm f4, with all of the teleconverters, as well as the 150 to 400mm. So that is a plethora of lenses that you know is going to take that that sort of environmental punishing. But again, this is the whole concept around OM system that we want people to see, is that it's that companion camera. It not only goes with you wherever you go, it's going to be able to capture in any environment. So incredibly exciting to sort of take it to that new official level. But we always knew that our cameras were very well put together. And there's actually some internal testing videos that we showed for the EM1 Mark III and the EM1X, where they put the camera on a jig with water jets and basically blast it from all angles, which is actually technically higher than IP53. That's sort of around from 60 degrees down, which is basically where your rain's going to come from. But it just means that any environment, the camera's going to have you covered. High durability shutter unit and dust reduction system. Again, those are something that we've come to expect from this level of camera. But a new battery, which is incredibly important as well, because you needed something to be able to drive and power everything that's going on. So it's not only 20% better as far as recording shots, but that's the SEPA testing. In the real world, we actually had a camera with a photographer from WA capture with a pre-production unit, and he shot, I think it was over 3,000 shots on a singular battery charge. But that is actually a tip for everybody who's using an electronic, or I should say a mirrorless camera that has an electronic shutter. You'll actually always get better battery performance when you use that electronic shutter. So hence why you can be able to capture that amount of frames. But to do it on not even a full battery depletion, that's pretty impressive. So I'll be interested to see people's, again, real-time feedback, because it is genuinely impressive. Another couple of points on charging and power is that it charges via USB-C, which is great because it means you can use power banks, you can charge it in the car. But what it does actually come with a wall charger and a USB cable inside the box, which means you can charge it anywhere. And what is actually really impressive as well is that if you get the battery grip and you've got the additional battery in there, that one singular USB-C connection will charge both the battery in camera as well as the battery inside your battery grip as well. For video creators out there, I'm really excited as well, is that you can charge and power via USB-C and output via HDMI to an Atomos recorder at the same time. So incredibly powerful tool, because there is no video record time limitation with the camera, which means that you can shoot for as long as you need to, or as long as basically your media or your battery power allows you to do. So again, all about that flexibility.
We did have a pre-question just on the
slots,
battery.
as you would expect. Sorry, Phil?
So I was just going to say, we did actually have a pre-question just on the battery. I'm pretty sure we know the answer, but I'm just going to get you to confirm. Now, they did ask, the BLH1 batteries, they're definitely not compatible with this series, are they?
Yeah, correct. And it's actually down. Actually, I'll pull this out so you can actually see it. So I'm just going to take my grip off. The actual physical shape and size is different to the previous battery. So it's actually got curved edges to it. So whereas the BLH1's a square. So it's about the same width, but the actual shape to go into camera is different because of those curved edges. So unfortunately, it means that it's not backwards compatible. But again, they needed to develop a new battery to be able to support this level of power that the OM-1 has. So sorry to disappoint you guys that it is a little bit different. We haven't actually changed batteries for quite a considerable amount of time. But again, there was a purpose to it. It wasn't just to create a new battery for a new battery's sake.
And those USB type C like charging protocols require like a new battery structure as well.
Not so much, because we've had USB-C charging on the EM1X and the EM1 Mark III, and you could basically charge them on any sort of power bank. It was only the PD requirement, or the PD power requirement, that would be to power the camera. I'm pleased to say that you can charge this on basically anything. So I've got some lower level banker chargers as well as the PD ones. Charging's no problem. It's only the powering of the camera that requires that PD output.
Yeah. Oh, cool.
Cool. Okay, quickly into video, guys, because they've made massive inroads for our brand for focusing stabilization in video over the last couple of years. But we really were lacking on a couple of key things, and they were frame rates and internal recording quality. So very pleased to see that they've upped their game when it comes to this, because you're capturing cinema 4K or 4K in 60 frames. You've also got internal 10-bit recording as well. There is a new log profile that's going to be released. I believe it'll be announced at the same time as Atomos support, because I'm really excited that they've actually said that the full support of this camera will be given to the Ninja 5. So you won't have to upgrade to the Plus in order to get the most out of the OM-1, which for lots of people, me included, I've got 2 of them, so I didn't really want to have to upgrade if I didn't have to. But that's incredibly important, because I know that there's going to be lots of people in that same situation where they've got that existing equipment. They want to maximize what they can do with the new camera, and you can definitely do that with that, yes. So from Hex, sorry guys, just a little question here. Also from Malcolm as well. So did you say that you can charge the battery and use the camera at the same time? Absolutely, yes. So it's actually something that lots of people wanted from the EM1X, but there was the physical construct of the camera didn't allow it, whereas they've listened to that user feedback, and you've now got the ability to do that with the new camera as well. And also from Hex, so good to know you can power off mains and operate. Yeah, absolutely. Also, another quick comment here. So talking charging with power bank, can you use non-Olympus cable if you're on the road and not have the Ollie supplied cable available? Charging, I don't think is so much of a problem, as long as that cable is actually PD power rated if you are trying to actually run the camera, because some of those cheaper cables really just aren't designed to do it, or they're actually more designed for data transfer as opposed to power and data transfer as well. So always make sure and check that you do have something that you're going to get the most out of. But as far as I'm aware, you don't need to only ever use that Olympus cable, especially for charging. That should be fine. But that new cable that does come with the OM-1, I'm actually using that cable plugged into an EM1 Mark III running on our webcam software. So it will obviously charge and runs off power, but it's data transfer capable as well. Cool. HLG or HDR output is available if you are using an external recorder or an Atomos recorder. But if you do, and this is why I said this is such a big deal that they've given this full capability to the Ninja 5, is that for the creators out there, it means that you can shoot in 12-bit ProRes RAW, outputting to that Atomos recorder if you really want it. So you've not only got the speed, but you've also got that file malleability and flexibility in post-production as well. So really, really exciting, because when you combine it with our focusing system as well as our stabilization system, you've got the perfect run and gun set up for regardless of the situation that you're in. Cool. Quick little couple of key points that I just want to nail before we move off video is the 4K 60 is actually oversampled from 5K with no crop. You can also do up to 240 frames HD recording as well, but there is a slight crop on that. You can shoot in either 8-bit or 10-bit internal to the camera, but apart from battery life or media size, there's no limitation to how long you can record with the camera, which is incredibly exciting, because this is the first camera from OM System and Olympus that has actually done that. You've also got some other video dedicated settings in there that you would expect from there as well. And also your settings save individually from still shooting to video, which again is really important. If you do transition from one to the other, you don't want to have to start all over again with getting your exposure right. All of those things save independently, as you would expect again. Okay, a couple of additional features that we can whip through. I could spend all day talking about the new menu system, but I'm not going to. But it is actually a really, really important part of the camera, because they completely rebuilt this from the ground up to make it not only easy to drive for an existing Olympus user, but also a lot more familiar and easier to drive if you haven't used an Olympus camera before. So everything's right there in front of you. They're all the tabs are combined, instead of having to go from one end of the menu to the other to change something that really should be put together. The other really exciting thing, and it doesn't sound like such a big deal, but when you're driving the camera, I promise you it does, is that if you've changed something and another setting becomes grayed out because of that, it actually tells you why. So it'll actually, you press OK or the info button, it'll come up saying this. For example, if you plug in any of our cameras via HDMI, your touchscreen stuff goes away. So if you try to change touchscreen settings, it'll say no, because you're plugged into HDMI. So again, all about user experience. It doesn't sound like such a big deal, but when you've been out in the field changing a whole bunch of stuff, and then you're trying to activate something else and it won't, if the camera doesn't tell you why, you've got to scratch your head and then go, okay, go all the way back to the beginning, or reset your camera, which obviously nobody really wants to do, because then you've got to start everything from all over again. So, so again, very, very well thought out, and it is really, really nice to drive. Also, dedicated autofocus button on the back of the camera, which again isn't a huge deal, but because you've always been able to reappropriate that AFL button on the back of the camera for rear button focusing, but you now got that dedicated button to be able to do it. Okay, so some quick comparison, guys, and then I'm pretty much done, and then I'll be throwing back to you guys because we want to hear your questions. Some quick little things when you're going, some in-house comparisons compared to the EM1 Mark III and the EM1X. As you can see, it's pretty much top trumps, and the reason for that is that this is not just an incremental upgrade. This is a massive, massive leap forward when it comes to multiple things that you're going to see within the camera. So most of those core technologies we've covered tonight, but when it comes to system expandability, a couple of other really important things as well is that all of these are the new accessories that will be available in the next couple of weeks. So the battery grip and battery we've already talked about. The external battery charger, you can actually buy the dual charger on its own, or you can have it with a spare battery as well. And for somebody who's asking about remote shooting, this new remote control is going to be available in a couple of weeks as well. So it is Bluetooth operated, so it's got a nice range on it on its own, but it does come with a physical cable as well. So you don't have to use it wirelessly if you don't want to. But when it comes to all the other accessories and everything, sorry, Lockie, did you have something?
I said super handy if I have a Bluetooth
cool.
one-in-one. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So same as all lenses and all flash accessories are obviously intercompatible with previous generation Olympus cameras as well as the OM-1. But quietly at the time, there wasn't a lot of song and dance about these, but they actually released and announced 2 new lenses at the same time as the OM-1. So the first one is an upgraded version of the 12-40, which is pretty much a staple in most people's kits. But what they've actually done with this is made it splash-proof, dust-proof, and freeze-proof to the same level as the camera. So it's got that IP53 rating on it. And it's also got fluorine coating on the front element to make that nice and slippery so things don't get stuck to it. But the bigger deal is actually this guy, and I've got this on the front of my camera. I'm going to hold this up so you guys can see it. This is how small the 40 to 150 f4 is. So I'll hold this up here so people can see it. This is how small this lens is. So that way, there we go. So this is how tiny this lens is. So it's a constant for pro optics, pro build quality. And the reason why this is such an important lens for us is that we've now got a range of 2.8s as well as f4s. So even if you shoot with not an OM-1, so a 5 series or a 10 series camera, you've now got a lens that enables you to shoot any environment, but not weigh you down or conflict with the way that you wanted to keep your camera size or profile. So cool. Also, OS Share app, so our wireless control app has already been updated. It's not just for file transfer and camera control. What you can actually do with this is update your firmware on the camera and a lens that you've got attached to it at the time. You can also back up your settings and then reinstall those settings onto another camera. If you go, playing around with something, or you loan the camera to somebody, or if you've got multiple cameras, you can save all of those setting profiles within the app and then reload them back onto your camera completely wirelessly. So we've only had one camera in our range that had this before. It was the OM-1 Mark III, but I would imagine that you would see this on more and more cameras because it really sits well with that whole DNA of being shoot anywhere and not be tethered to anything. So obviously really, really streamlined and great. Finally, guys, Workspace program has been updated, as I mentioned right at the beginning, and also our capture software, which is where you can either hard tether with a USB cable to shoot in studio, or you can wirelessly tether with the OM-1 as well as the OM-1 Mark III and the OM-1X. Okay, we got there. Cool. Yeah. So sorry to go a little bit longer there, guys, but thank you so much for your questions as we go along, because again, this is exactly what we want to do when we're speaking to you guys, is making sure that we're answering your questions and you guys walk away knowing exactly what you needed to know. So that's it from the official part from me from the presentation side. So now I throw the floor open to everybody, and if you've got any questions, then please feel free to ask.
I think we'll swing back to Wendy. There's the question.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was going.
I just remembered. Yeah. Screen now for you.
Area pointer.
So the question was, just while you're looking for it, can you explain for autofocus area point what the difference is between OM-1 and OM-2 and when you would use each?
Yep. Okay. Cool. So one, I suppose the reason why I generally tell people to use the on-2 is that the way the focus points are actually being displayed to you in real time. Now, the new camera is a little bit different compared to the OM-1 Mark III and the OM-1X and even the OM-1 Mark II, where you really only see this on-2 benefit when you're using all points, because what you'd actually be able to do is turn all your focus points on, and then as it's tracking or recognizing not so much a subject, but where it's focusing, you'll see all of those green autofocus points moving around to maintain focus on that subject. With the new camera, when you enable this, even when you're using the small or slightly larger focus point grids, you're actually going to see that process happening in real time. So I guess it's not just it is slightly a visual cue, but it's also the way that the focusing system is actually reading out and refreshing and then moving around to show you where that focus point is. So like I said, it is a little bit just visual, but because if you don't have it switched on, the process is still happening, but you're just not seeing it. But I guess the benefit of being able to see it is that when you're shooting in real time, you can actually half press this, and it mainly works well for continuous focus, is you can actually see that movement around within that grid or even those smaller points. I think you can do it from the small, not the tiniest point, but you can do it from the small setup as well. So it's kind of a personal preference thing. The performance is not going to be actually any different. It's really just, again, that visual showing you what's actually happening. But I guess the benefit is because you can see what's going on, you can make an adjustment or a movement on that focus point that you're using, as well as when you're using all points as well.
And one more here we've just got in from Ken.
Yes.
So, can you use the 2 times multiplier with the new 40 to 150 f4?
No, unfortunately not. No, the construct of the lens just doesn't allow it. It's got a little bit of a jut in the back of it. Actually, I'll hold it up so you can see what I'm talking about. So it does have a little bit of a jut in the bottom of it. I'll hold that at an angle so you can sort of see it a bit better. But it's not deep enough to be able to enable you to use either the 1.4 or the 2 times teleconverter. I guess the other downside to that, I suppose, is And yes, you can obviously do it with a 300mm f4, but that's a lens that's probably more designed to be able to have that additional reach. If you haven't actually seen a 40-150 f4 in the flesh yet, that's why I wanted to hold it up and actually show you by hand, like just how small it is. Yeah, if you want to be able to use that tele converter, then yeah, the 40-150 f2.8 or one of the other teles is going to be the way to go.
Cool. Just got another one there from Wendy, and I believe she's just referring back to the autofocus question from before with the OM-2, and she's just mentioning, does it work with subject tracking?
Yeah, not exactly. Again, the process is sort of happening, but once you use the intelligent subject detection, or the AI detect autofocus, I should say, that actually takes over. So you're going to see that box around your subject, and then face and eye, or head and eye, based on what the subject is that you're selecting, and that's actually what's going to take over. So actually, one good point that I didn't say, sort of mention before is that with the EM1X, which is our only other camera that had the intelligent subject detection autofocus built into it, that was limited to when you were using continuous focus with tracking, or that focusing type. With the new camera, you can actually use every single focusing type except for manual, obviously, because the camera's not going to move, or the lens isn't going to move. But you can still use that subject detection with single focus or standard continuous focus, where you're actually selecting the point that you want to use and then tracking on top of that as well. So that was done, again, very deliberately and based on user feedback, because it's a little bit limiting. I mean, yes, it kind of makes sense to be able to switch that on and then have the subject track move when you are wanting to track the subject's movement, I should say. But there's going to be other times where the movements aren't going to be as dramatic, where you're going to have a slightly more static subject. So you want to use a different focusing type, just purely because it's more appropriate to the subject that you're shooting. So, so yeah, sorry I didn't bring that up before. I actually should have gone into more detail on that.
Oh, good. We're getting quite a bit of thanks for the presentation, and everyone seems to be very happy, and that seemed to be very informative. So thanks so much, Aaron.
No, thank you guys, and again, thank you so much for the comments, because they're doing online sessions, and I've done a lot of them. If you don't have that sort of interaction with people, like, you just feel like you're talking at people, and that's the last thing that we want to do. We want to make this as interactive as possible, because otherwise, I mean, YouTube videos are great, but they're obviously a one-way traffic when it comes to conversation. So you guys actually make and break these sessions. So thank you everybody for joining us, but also thank you for all of your comments as well.
Yeah, thanks everyone for providing us with the questions. The OM-1 is available now.
It is indeed.
Yeah,
is there
absolutely.
Anything you wanted to finish up with, Aaron, just before we head off?
Not at all, guys. Look, just a big thank you to yourselves and to CameraPro for having us along. It's obviously a big deal, this new OM-1 camera for us. But by the same token, that there's things that you read on paper, and anybody can jump online and check out website information and all that sort of thing. But for you to be able to bring these sorts of things to life for your community, to help educate people and have that conversation with people is absolutely so important. So thank you very much to you guys as well. I really appreciate it.
Not a problem. Thanks to yourself, Aaron. Yeah, definitely. And to OM System. It's brilliant to be able to do this together as a partnership. It's really good.
Yeah, your support is wonderful.
Yeah, and thanks to you guys as well. We've actually been able to do a coupon code that we're going to have just from today until Sunday midnight. So if you are looking to get in now, we can do this coupon code just at the bottom of the screen, and that's for the OM-1 as well as the 40-150. And that OM-50 off, that'll get you $50 off either one of those products. And as I say, that's till Sunday midnight.
Nice.
All right, guys, I think that's time to wrap up. So thank you to everyone for tuning in. That was really good. Thank you very much again to Aaron. Always good to have you on. And just last final thing, as always, subscribe to the channel to make sure you stay up to date to all the latest content. All right, that looks like it's it from us. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. See you later.
Have a good night.